I stood frozen, watching in disbelief as the HOA demolished my parents' nursing home with a wrecking ball, leaving elderly residents homeless and their lives in ruins. But when I uncovered the corruption driving it all, I knew exactly how to fight back. A bulldozer and some quick-dry cement turned out to be the perfect tools. "They're trying to kick us out again," Mom whispered, handing me a certified letter stamped with the HOA logo. My stomach sank. It was the third warning this year. Through the front window, I spotted Mrs. Carter across the street, pretending to prune her flawless hedges while keeping an eye on our house. 5 years ago, I never imagined I'd be locked in a battle with our homeowners association. Back then, my parents had transformed our family home in Willow Grove into Silver Haven Care, a small nursing home for seniors who needed support but didn't want the sterile feel of big facilities. My dad, a retired doctor, and my mom, a nurse with 30 years of experience, invested not just their savings but their hearts into creating something special. "Let me see that," I said, taking the letter. Its formal language couldn't mask the threat: cease all business operations within 30 days or face legal action. "They can't do this. We have permits," I insisted. Dad shuffled in from the sunroom, where he'd been playing chess with Mr. Grayson, one of our 8 residents. "Ellie, we've been through this. Mrs. Carter doesn't care about permits. She wants us gone." Through the window, I saw Mrs. Carter's son, Ryan, pull up in his sleek silver Audi. He owned a huge eldercare chain 2 towns over, charging triple what my parents did. Every month, he offered to buy our property. Every month, my parents refused. "I'll handle this," I promised. As a paralegal at Davis Valley, I had some legal know-how, not enough to take on an entire HOA, maybe, but enough to stall them. The next morning, I marched over to Mrs. Carter's house. Her garden gnomes seemed to scowl at me as I knocked. When she opened the door, her expression tightened. "Eleanor," she said, not inviting me in, "what can I do for you?" I tried to keep it civil. I wanted to discuss the letter. "There's a misunderstanding. Our permits are valid." "It's not about permits anymore," she cut in. "It's about property values. The board decided a commercial business doesn't fit here." "Commercial? It's 8 elderly people living in a home." I protested. "The ambulance has come twice this year." "Twice too many," she snapped, tapping her foot. "The board meeting's Thursday. Make your case, but the decision's practically final." As I left, I caught Ryan inside, pretending to check his phone. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away. That night, as I tucked Mrs. Harper into bed, she was 91 and still recalled the Great Depression, she clutched my hand. "Are they going to make us leave, dear?" "No," I promised. "I won't let them." The board meeting was a farce. 7 people sat at a long table, Mrs. Carter at the center with her perpetual frown. I brought permits, neighbor testimonials, even a letter from the mayor praising our work. It didn't matter. "We voted," Mrs. Carter declared before I finished. "Silver Haven Care violates our covenant on businesses in residential areas. You have 30 days to relocate your clients." "Residents," I corrected. "Some have lived here longer than you." "Regardless," she pressed on, "we expect compliance." That weekend, the harassment escalated. HOA inspectors swarmed daily, fining us for a sidewalk crack, a bird feeder 2 inches too low, and Mr. Grayson's wheelchair ramp as an unapproved addition. I filed appeals, called the county, and pitched the story to a reporter who later ghosted me. "We should just sell," Mom said one night after a $500 fine for improper waste disposal. An oxygen tank box left on the porch for an hour. "No," I insisted, pointing to the living room where residents laughed over Jeopardy. "This is our home, their home." Then came Ryan's offer, 20% above market value, 48-hour deadline. My parents wavered, exhausted. "Let me try one more thing," I pleaded. That night, I scoured county records and found gold, a 1973 subdivision plan showing our property zoned differently, with a grandfather clause for multifamily use. I called my college friend Lisa, a lawyer. "This could work," she said. "Their covenant can't override it." I was gearing up for the next meeting when my parents left for a medical conference in Chicago. Dad was presenting eldercare research. "Don't do anything crazy," Mom teased as they left. "Never." I grinned, waving from the porch, clueless that our world would soon collapse. That night, I noticed odd activity at the HOA office. Cars late, lights on past midnight. Through binoculars, I saw Mrs. Carter arguing while Ryan nodded. Something's wrong, I told Lisa. Document everything, she advised. But dawn brought a nightmare. Heavy machinery roared down our street. A wrecking ball smashed into our home, tearing through the living room. I raced downstairs, nearly crashing into Mr. Grayson. What's happening? He asked, voice trembling. Back door now, I ordered. Outside, chaos unfolded. Mrs. Carter stood behind a barrier, clipboard in hand, as the wrecking ball swung again. Stop, I screamed. People are inside. The operator hesitated, but she nodded coldly. Section 8, Paragraph 4. No commercial enterprises, she recited, waving a sealed document. This is insane. I lunged, but security guards blocked me. You can't demolish an occupied building. Permits were invalidated yesterday, she said, avoiding my gaze. Court approved. Court? I wasn't notified. Delivered, she smirked. The third swing hit my parents' bedroom, shattering memories. Mrs. Evans, 94, sobbed behind me as our residents huddled in night clothes. I called 911, shaking. They're demolishing our nursing home. People are still evacuating. Ryan watched smugly from his Audi. Police arrived 15 minutes later, too late to stop half the house from becoming rubble. Officer Daniels looked baffled. Unauthorized demolition? I pointed at the wreckage. They're claiming permits. Mrs. Carter handed him papers. Court approved. Officer, structural safety and zoning violations. Structural concerns? That's a lie. I shouted. Daniels frowned but said, these look legit. Let me see. I reached. She pulled back. HOA property now. Foreclosure for unpaid fines, she said. What fines? Special assessment, $25,000, due yesterday. My legs buckled. Mrs. Harper had chest pains. Mr. Grayson's meds were buried in debris. An ambulance took her away as demolition continued. Lisa arrived, furious. Show me the court order, she demanded. Mrs. Carter complied. Lisa's face darkened. This isn't a demolition order. It's a complaint, not even judged. Daniels pointed to a signature, but Lisa snapped. Wrong address. 1437. Elm Lane, not Drive. Mrs. Carter shrugged. Clerical error. You can't demolish on intent. Lisa yelled. Daniels stopped the crew, but the final wing collapsed. Mrs. Carter checked her watch. Done. Clear the debris by weekend or face fines. She left, heels clicking, abandoning 7 homeless seniors. What now? Mr. Grayson asked, trembling. First, we find you a safe place, I said, glaring at Mrs. Carter and Ryan's smug smiles. Then we uncover their game. The residents ended up in a community center, crying on cots. This can't be legal, I whispered, calling Lisa. Don't touch the site. Take photos, she ordered. She arrived in her suit, snapping pictures. They need demolition permits. This, she waved Mrs. Carter's paper. Just a complaint. That night, we dug into HOA minutes, zoning laws, and property maps. A record showed they'd targeted us without notice. Violation 1. Rules changed without votes. Mrs. Carter signed solo. Why us? Lisa mused. At 3 a.m., I found it. A news clipping of Ryan opening an elder care facility. She destroyed us for his profit, I told Lisa, showing her. Conflict of interest, illegal, she said. We gathered more, financial records, emergency motions, ex-board member interviews. Mr. Ortiz whispered. Jenkins got shady. I quit. He gave me unedited meeting recordings. Mrs. Carter bragged about erasing our eyesore for Ryan's gang. Mrs. Larson's security footage showed Mrs. Carter taking an envelope from Ryan. This is corruption, Lisa said, sliding evidence across the table. Police time. I stared at the HOA office photo, its smug facade mocking us. The residents needed homes, not revenge fantasies. But I searched construction auctions, buying a bulldozer with cash. Landscaping, I told the manager. My parents returned, devastated by the rubble. 20 years, Dad whispered. Mom sobbed. I didn't mention the bulldozer. Then came a $188,000 demolition bill from Mrs. Carter. Property maintenance, she cooed over the phone. We'll see you in court, I snapped. Good luck, she laughed. That sealed it. I scouted the HOA office, closing at 5 p.m., 2 cameras, blind spots. At the community center, Mrs. Larson's mom asked, "When can I go home?" "Soon," I lied. County records showed the HOA building's boundaries. Neighbors split. Some helped, others vilified us. Ryan taunted me from his SUV, snapping photos. "Nice trash pile." Lisa texted, "Court in 3 months. Too long." At 2:30 a.m., in black, I drove the bulldozer to the HOA office. A hidden transfer from Ryan to the HOA clinched it. I crashed through the doors, alarms blaring. For Mrs. Larson, I yelled, hitting again. For my parents. In 15 minutes, it was rubble. I poured cement, painted lines, and planted a sign, "Silver Haven Care Visitor Parking." Dawn broke as I left, a cop waving obliviously. Ryan called, gloating about denied permits. "Check the news," I said, hanging up. Lisa texted, "Corruption evidence hit the DA. Reporters swarmed our house. HOA office turned parking lot. Comment. Shocked." I mumbled, per Lisa's play dumb advice. Mrs. Carter and Ryan arrived, raging. "You did this," she screamed. She admitted the demolition on camera. Ryan paled. Detectives nabbed him for financial questions. Mrs. Larson accused them of elder abuse. 6 weeks later, Silver Haven reopened, county approved. Mrs. Carter and Ryan faced charges. Their facility became affordable housing. Mrs. Larson unpacked, winking. Some rules are worth breaking. Sometimes, justice needs a bulldozer's nudge.